I think what will put pressure on Putin is the fact that people, as I say, people like our own Foreign Secretary, David Cameron, others in NATO and indeed the Americans are now beginning to say to Ukraine, you can use these weapon systems to strike deep into Russia. And therefore, weapon systems like the ATACMS, like air power, drones, and so on and so forth, giving them the ability to strike deep inside Russia, not just into Crimea, but deep into Russia. And why wouldn't we have allowed them to do that? At the end of the day, Ukraine has been hit hard, their infrastructure in particular, their energy infrastructure, and so on. So I think if giving them the ability to do that and allowing them to do that is a very important message. And if they can begin to cause serious trouble deep inside Russia, then I think Putin may be, put in a position where he's having to scratch his head and think, we're not making progress on the ground. They have the ability to hit deeply, and we've got to somehow bring this thing to an end.
What do you think it means for the future of General Gerasimov? There's been some speculation that the new defense minister may come in and want to see a change in the military command structure as well. Do you think that's feasible?
Yes, it is. I think, anybody that's put into a new appointment like this will look around and decide who are the people that he can or cannot work with. I mean, we shouldn't forget we UK went through an extraordinary number of generals in World War II. I mean, hundreds of generals came and went pretty quickly in some places. And a lot of the time, it does come back to individual chemistry and confidence and trust. And these things take time to build. Now, I don't know who else he's got in mind, if he has got anybody else in mind, but I wouldn't be surprised if he didn't make some changes, bringing fresh thinking in and bringing in people that he personally, as I say, knows, has trust in, and he thinks will be able to deliver whatever it is that he now, wants to crack on with. So changes potentially, absolutely. Will they be significant and will he make wholesale changes? I don't know. I mean, Russia does have a habit of doing this. And we've seen a lot of changes over the last couple of years because clearly this campaign has not gone well. So, we'll have to wait and see. But I wouldn't be surprised if there were some changes.
When do you think we will see a fresh wave of Russian mobilization? A lot of people had expected it in the weeks immediately after Putin's so-called re-election.
Yeah.
Do you think we will see it now?
I think that yes is the answer. I think Putin, having been re-elected, trying to put yourself into the mind of these sort of guys is not easy, clearly. But you can imagine that he will now, having been re-elected, make these changes. He wants to see significant success this year. And we know that he can only be able to bring that about by ramping up production, getting all the war production levels and so forth. But also he has got to mobilize some more people, particularly if he still has the intent of trying to secure the whole of Ukraine. If in his own mind, what he's thinking is, let's grab a little bit more territory, do this buffer zone that we were talking about before, or not, and not push on, beyond that, and then just sit there and say to Zelensky, you need to negotiate, and come from a position that I'm not going to give up the eastern provinces, I'm not going to give up Crimea, you're not in a position of retaking that territory, and therefore let's negotiate. There are rumors that Zelensky and Putin might even meet one another fairly soon. I mean, I picked that up last week and had a conversation actually only yesterday. Now, I don't know whether that's true or not, but there are some rumors. So one has to try and imagine in Putin's mind, what is he trying to achieve here? I'm not convinced that he really believes anymore that he can secure the whole of Ukraine, but I'm pretty sure that he will not give up on what he's got, and he may well try and achieve a bit more through some sort of, opening up this counteroffensive, or indeed putting more pressure on in the south and east, where the pressure hasn't gone away. And Ukraine is struggling, going back to mobilization, Ukraine is struggling to mobilize people. I mean, a lot of young people are not signing up, and quite a lot have left. And they are, there's a lot of conversation going on in Ukraine about what to do about this. So I don't think there's any doubt in my mind that Putin wants to increase the pressure, ramp up production, put these new people in place, and then, as you say, mobilize more people in order to be able to maintain the pressure, if not increase it.
It's fascinating what you said there about the potential, and I appreciate it is only speculation, but the potential for Putin and Zelensky to meet. How would that even work in practice? I mean, where would they meet, for instance?
Somewhere that hopefully you and I would not know. nor anybody else in the media. It has to be done, quietly behind the scenes, and it has to be done out of the spotlight of the media and the world's eyes. So, where would it be? Well, there are options. I mean, clearly, some of the Nordic countries have traditionally hosted peace talks. I don't know is the honest answer, but it would have to be. There would obviously be preliminary meetings having to go on, and conversations being had. But that happens in all of these conflicts. I mean, it's like Israel-Gaza. There's lots of conversations going on, and you have officials at certain levels that get involved at certain stages before you ramp it up to your foreign ministers and so on, until you then have the heads of state meetings. So there's work to be done. I don't think I can't see it being done in Russia or Ukraine. So, Belarus potentially, I suppose, but maybe somewhere else, in the region. I can't see both of them flying off, to be honest, long distances. I suspect it will have to be on the ground in the neighborhood, in inverted commas. But I stress it's only speculation. I had picked it up. I picked it up from a couple of sources. So I'm not saying it's not happening. It's certainly possible. It may not be probable at this stage, but it is potentially the case.
And if we look at what Ukraine can hope to achieve realistically in the next few months, I mean, it's interesting, despite the Russian advances in the northeast, Ukraine continued to have some success striking targets within Russian territory and indeed striking bases in Crimea, for instance. What do you think realistically is a good next few months for Ukraine?
I think that actually is, the key. I don't want to be dismissive or be less than positive about Ukraine. We all want Ukraine to do well. And we can talk about what does victory look like in inverted commas. But if they can regain territory on the ground, then fantastic. But they have got to have that ability, as we were discussing earlier. But I think what will put pressure on Putin is the fact that people, as I say, people like our own Foreign Secretary David Cameron, others in NATO, and indeed the Americans, are now beginning to say to Ukraine, you can use these weapon systems to strike deep into Russia, and therefore weapon systems like the ATACMS, like air power, drones, and so on and so forth, giving them the ability to strike deep inside Russia, not just into Crimea, but deep into Russia. And why wouldn't we have allowed them to do that? At the end of the day, Ukraine has been hit hard. Their infrastructure, in particular, their energy infrastructure, and so on. So I think if giving them the ability to do that and allowing them to do that is a very important message. And if they can begin to cause serious trouble deep inside Russia, then I think Putin may be, put in a position where he's having to scratch his head and think, we're not making progress on the ground. They have the ability to hit deeply, and we've got to somehow bring this thing to an end. So I do think that's
Yeah.
a potential serious change.
No, it's really interesting. You mentioned that shift of stance in terms of how Western supplied weapons can be used by the Ukrainians. But I know there'll be much of our frontline audience who will be incredibly frustrated that throughout this conflict, it feels like the West have maybe been one step behind what Ukraine needs at that time, whether it was providing anti-tank missiles at the beginning, saying, no, that's not going to happen, and then we provide them, whether it's saying, yes, okay, now you can use Western supplied missiles to strike into Russian territory, even to go back to our earlier conversation, whether we should use seized Russian assets to fund the war effort in Ukraine. Why do you think it is the West, and maybe it's a perception, maybe it is the reality, seems to be one step behind?
I think it is a reality, actually. I don't think it is just a perception. What's gone on in the minds of our prime ministers, foreign secretaries, and so on, I think, particularly in places like Germany, people genuinely were very concerned about this, this campaign, war, spreading beyond the boundaries of Ukraine. And people took Putin's messages pretty seriously, and so they should. So when he started talking about, if you give them this stuff, I'm going to do X, and talking about tactical nuclear weapons and all this business, people, having to face some tough choices, and initially saying to themselves, I think, let's give Ukraine the ability to defend themselves, but we need to be very cautious about allowing them to, take a much, give them much more ability to strike deep into Russia because of the potential of what that may lead to. We've got supplies coming in through places like Poland. We've got NATO forces deployed elsewhere. And I can understand that. I mean, I don't want to be clever about it. Leadership is tough, and making some of these choices is not easy. But I do happen to believe that we have been very slow in allowing Ukraine to do what has been necessary. again, I don't want to, hark back to history too much, but, look at World War II when we were, holding out in those early years, 1940, etc. We took a long time for the Americans to send us what was, of course, in those days, we had to lease it and pay it all back. Hopefully, Ukraine won't have to pay it all back, but we had to, and it took us till only a few years ago to repay all this stuff from World War II. But it does take time, and I think the Americans, at one point, were probably thinking, well, we'll help Britain hold out, but the ability to, do we really want them to do other things? I don't want to, mix the World War II too much, but I do think at the end of the day, we have been one step behind. And, this is, from a Ukrainian point of view, this is a war of national survival. I think we need to give them the ability to really try to strike deep and conduct offensive operations. Whether they will succeed or not is another issue. I can't see Russia being defeated. That's, at the end of the day, I come back to the reality, or I think the reality that I just can't see Russia being defeated. And therefore, Ukraine, we have to give Ukraine as much ability as possible to strike deep and to cause Putin to pause himself and to think about, okay, how do we bring this to an end? And it's in our interest to make sure that happens. I don't happen to believe that Putin is about to, have another crack at the Baltic states or wherever. I think, I just can't see him making a decision to take on NATO in that sense. But I do think that if he does reasonably well in this campaign, the grey zone undoubtedly will open up. He's doing it already to some degree. The cyberspace, attacks, and so on. I think the pressure of supporting people like Serbia over issues like Kosovo, I think he will continue to create trouble. And therefore, the more we can do to ensure that he doesn't come out of this too well, the better. But we have been behind the power curve, in my view. I mean, I stress, I don't like criticizing senior leadership, publicly, because it's tough business. But overall, looking back and looking at where we are today, I think we have been behind the power curve.
Thank you for watching Frontline for Times Radio. For more, click subscribe on our YouTube channel. You can listen to Times Radio, and you can read more about the war in Ukraine and global security with your Times digital subscription.